Well, yesterday morning at 8:07 a.m., our world changed. Thankfully, it didn't actually change, but certainly our perception of our world changed. With the alert of imminent danger hanging over our heads, people did everything from not worry to panic. People prayed and they gathered together their loved ones. They called people on the phone to share their concern. And amazingly, there were those that had no idea that anything was happening. Some resolved that if it was time, it was their time. And others gathered in closets and in bathrooms in the hopes and prayers that this would not be a true statement. But I know about moments like these, or that moments like these reveal who we are. They reveal the heart of a people. They reveal our soul and the truest self that we are. And when you have moments of life that you think peril may come, you begin to find out what's really important. I would imagine that very few people went around their homes to gather all their favorite possessions. Instead, what I found and have heard throughout today and all day yesterday was that people wanted to express their heart and their concern for others, to ask for forgiveness or to forgive those that had hurt them. So moments like this grant us a divine opportunity to discover who we are and who we believe we should be. Certainly investigations and firings and finger pointing are going to happen, but I'm wondering if we, the faithful, could look at yesterday as a gift. As a gift. Now, I'm not dismissing the real fear, the continual concern, and the actual issues that face us as a people. But what can we take out of yesterday that's a gift, that allows us to take this moment in time and hear the good news of our gospel, that 365 times it is said, don't be afraid or do not fear. One for every day of our year, even in the face of uncertainty. You know, yesterday was one of those days that's sobering. It's a day that time feels like it stands still yet again. And it was terrifying for many. And again, for others, it was no big deal. I know for my family, it was a terrifying moment as I heard my children, all three, crying, saying, "I don't want to die." I've heard today through two other services of people that said, you know, we're older in years, and if it's my time, it's my time. It really didn't bother me. And I've heard and watched in the last service especially the families gathering and women holding each other, trying to make sense of what kind of world is this, that we would ever have to worry about something like this. Yes, there was a mistake made, but how do we now live in light of the reality that our naivety and maybe the realization that we're vulnerable came right to the front of our faces? What yesterday was and continues to be in this moment, I believe, is what the scriptures call a kairos moment in time. Last week, do you remember what the word was of Greek that we learned? Chronos. Chronological time. It's the idea that we watch time based on clocks and calendars. This week, we had already planned on talking about kairos time. This idea that it's something that's beyond something that's measurable, but instead it's something that is set apart or holy or opportune. And so yesterday, as I sat in the afternoon trying to make sense in my own brain of what in the world's going on in our world, I thought maybe I should rewrite the whole entire sermon. Start over. And I started rewriting it, and I ended up writing the same sermon. Because of me, somehow God works in mysterious ways, and this sermon that we had already projected to do a couple months ago was one in which is fitting yet today. So what is kairos time? Well, according to Thayer's lexicon, it can be translated as an occasion, a time that is set apart or proper, or more directly, an opportune period of time. An opportune period of time. It's the time that's marked by an awakening, a sense of impact or difference in our world That sometimes you have that phrase, time stood still. That is Kairos time, in which the confines of our world seem to disappear suddenly, and we stand in the present moment for all the good and the bad that it has. So today we turn to this ancient book of wisdom called the Ecclesiastes. The writer writes this writing that has become well known because of a song called Turn, Turn, Turn. Right? There is a season. That's the only part that I know. But in essence, what this writer is trying to say is that I'm not putting value on whether it's good or bad. This is just the reality of our lives. Our lives are seasonal. And the one thing that we know for sure is that change comes. And change is sometimes welcomed and sometimes not. Seldom is it planned, but most often it happens. And so how do we deal with these opposites, 14 different opposites that happen in our lives? And how do we know the season that we are in? And so when you look at your life, what season are you in right now? I know for me, I'm in the best season of my life. Hands down, I'm almost 41 years young. I have 3 children who are the cutest and most adorable kids in the history of humanity. I have this amazing wife that we have spent more of our life together than apart at this point. I have an amazing job, a career, a calling, to be a minister at a church that I could have only dreamed would ever talk to someone like me. And I get to do life with you, the people of Central Union Church. I can't imagine that life can get any better than this moment in time. Although, being a part of a church of multiple generations, I'm told by many that empty nest years are awesome. It is wonderful to have the kids fly the coop and enjoy the wonders of silence once more. I've even been told by many of them that the kids will want to come home to visit. You just have to make sure there's a timeline of how long they stay. I don't know that to be true, but one day I will find out. But the season of life right now that we find ourselves in is the season that has all of a sudden changed. It's a season that has awakened a new thing in our world, that we literally live in an unfair, unsafe world. And much of our world already knew that. We're privileged people that live in the United States of America. For our normative norm is what most people dream of. And what we experienced yesterday of a scare is what some people live with every day of their life. And to be sympathetic now and empathetic to those that deal with this reality sheds light on what our world is really like. In the midst of it, what do we do in this the seasonal change that we're undergoing together as a community and as a people? Well, the writer of Ecclesiastes, again, doesn't give value as to whether it's good or bad. In essence, what he says over and over again is your life is like a mist that comes and goes so fast that it's here for a moment and is gone. He also says, meaningless is everything that happens under the sun. And what he does is he speaks truth to the reality of our lives, is that our lives are a compilation of good and bad. And yet in the midst of it, we learn how to live. We learn how to be resilient. We learn who we actually are. And so maybe the gift of yesterday is that we learn how to be present in this moment. Not living in the past of what could have been or should have been, and not living into the future of what ought to be, but living in this moment of saying, this is the only gift I have that I'm sure of, is I have this moment. If ministry hasn't taught me anything else in this life, is I've done more funerals than I could ever count. And death comes to us all. Good thought, right? But the reality is that we don't know what our life is. But we know that we have this moment. And so how do we learn to be present to this season of our lives? Or whatever that season looks like. If it's the season of grief, be present to it. It doesn't make it good or bad. It's a gift. To be able to learn some deeper lessons of life and of love and of God. Maybe your season right now is a season of dancing. You've had a baby, or you're pregnant, or something really amazing has happened. You got a new job or a new house. And in this season, embrace it and live in it and enjoy it. But always be cognizant that it isn't forever. But instead, learn to embrace these seasonal changes. Seasons change. We know that, right? It's winter. In other words, it's not humid as humid. We know that our seasons of our lives have changed. Thank God we're not all teenagers still, right? And for some of you all, these seasons, you're living through the changing season right now. And for others, you're living in the basking radiance of a glorious season of life. But what do you do in the midst of all this stuff? And listen to the wisdom of the ages that says, embrace this moment. Enjoy the Kairos time. This time that isn't marked by a calendar or a clock, but is marked by a fullness, an opportunity, a sense of well-being, and firmly granted in this present moment. Today I want to teach you about an Old Testament thing that's all throughout the Old Testament. You probably, if you've ever read it, seen it. And sometimes we talk about this, the communion table, as, what's the other term that people use? Shouldn't be used for us, but it's used anyways. The altar. A-L-T-A-R, altar. The altar is an Old Testament idea. This, in our New Testament world that we live in, this is called the communion table, not the altar. But the altar was this idea in the Old Testament that had two purposes behind it. So imagine this is an altar. And this altar was used for two purposes in the ancient world. In the Israelite community, it was used for sacrifice. In essence, what it was used for was repentance, is the word that would be used. Repentance was this notion that because I've hurt another, or because I haven't listened to God, I need to repent or turn around from that which I've done and make right that which is wrong. And so the Old Testament gives all these laws that if you speak meanly to your wife, that you should kill 3 pigeons. I'm just making this up off the top of my head. I actually don't know what the laws are. That sometimes you would need a goat or a bull or a lamb or some grain. And that on this altar, the priest would come and make sacrifice to atone for the sins that you have committed. In essence, giving you a fresh start. So you could begin walking once more with a clean conscience, with God and with others. And so that oftentimes, in the Old Testament especially, that's how we think of altars, the place of sacrifice. But there's another image of altar that I think is really important for us to grab onto in light of this experience that we've had this weekend, but also in the idea of Kairos time. In the Old Testament, Abraham is called to leave his homeland and to go, and when he found the right spot, God would tell him to stop and be there. And when he finds that spot, he builds an altar. Because in that spot, he encounters the living God. And so he builds an altar as a reminder that this place is holy and set apart. And so throughout the Old Testament, what you find is the story of the Israelites moving from place to place. And whenever they encounter the living God, they build altars. And they leave them. Around Hawaii, I'm sure you've seen those, what are those called, the stacks? Carrots. Carrots? Yeah, altars. Exactly, that's what I'm trying to say, Brandon. And these are these things that help remind that this is holy. This is sacred. This is an opportune place to meet with God. And so as our faith grows, how do we name those places and those experiences in our own lives? That these are set apart, sacred, opportune moments in time in which God has met with us right where we are. Give you a real example. A few years ago, we as a family went to Colorado, to the Rockies, and went to one of the mountain villages to stay. And as we're driving up, we came across a pass, and at the top of the pass was a peak that still had snow in July on it. After being there for a few days and acclimating to the elevation, we decided that it would be really fun to hike to the peak. And so our, at the time, 11, 8, and 6-year-old were like, yeah, we can do it. And so we start hiking, and there was a moment where the path goes 2 different directions. One were a wide path, and one was a very narrow path, about 2 feet wide. And of course, we decided to go on the narrow path because we're the kind of people that go the road less traveled. And so we start hiking, and we come around this mountain, and suddenly as we're coming around, about 10 feet away, the hillside starts dropping deeply back into the valley. We're thousands of feet up above the valley floor. And as we're walking, I'm walking with one of my kids who just pauses in complete and utter fear and says, "I'm afraid I can't go any further." And I said, "Don't be afraid. I am your father." And of course, she was like, "Of course I'm safe." No, not at all. She said, "I can't go forward. I'm terrified." And I said to her, "Don't worry. I'm with you. I'm holding your hand. Nothing bad will happen to you." All the while, my heart's going a million miles a minute because I'm a little terrified myself. Up ahead, Kate and the others are going, and they start heading up to the peak. And by the time we got up there, they were already mesmerized by the beauty that they were beholding. And I think the boys had already gone and started playing in snow. And we gathered as a family up on that top of that mountain, 14,000 something feet high. We looked out over the horizon of all these different ranges and the beauty and the wonder of that sacred space. And in that moment, I said to the kids, "Come here." And up on the top of the Rocky Mountains, where there's not snow, there's lots of rocks. And I took a big rock and I picked it up and I carried it over and I laid it on the ground. And I explained to them that whenever you have an experience of the divine in these Kairos kind of moments, that we have no words to express what we have just experienced. We build an altar. And we as a family are going to build an altar as a statement of remembrance and of joy. So then Kate took a larger or a smaller rock and put it on top of mine, and then Sam put his rock on, and then Jane, and then William. And we gathered around that rock and held hands and we prayed together. God, thank you for this moment, the sacred moment of being together, of seeing the glorious wonder of your creation and not dying on the way up. On the way down, we took the road well-traveled, way easier. And every year since then, whenever we go away as a family, we always find ourselves on hikes, sometimes perilous and sometimes not. But in the midst of the hike, the kids say, "Can we build an altar? Because this is holy time, set apart, opportune connection with God." You see, yesterday morning scared the bejesus out of most people. Whether it was possible or not possible, the thought of was enough to scare. And we can scream at politicians and people with buttons. We can scream at those that should be held responsible, or we can take this moment as a gift and look at our lives and who we are, and look at our past and see what has been, and make right that which has been wrong. To forgive those that have hurt us and ask for forgiveness. And we can look to the future with this belief that God will guide us into it, and that's enough. But today, I hope you'll grab that blue prayer card that's in front of you in your rack. And today, what we've invited every service to do is to write out a prayer. Maybe it's a prayer of something of your past that you need forgiveness for, or to forgive someone else. Maybe it's a prayer of your future. God, help me to trust you. Help me to see the good that's in the bad. Help me to live a life that's set apart for you. Or maybe it's a prayer that today and just this day, help me to be thankful because I'm breathing in rich air this day. At the end of the service, after we hold hands and sing together, we're going to invite you to come and take that card and place it on our makeshift altar. And this week, what Brandon and I will do is pray for every single prayer, regardless if there's a name or not, in the belief that maybe, just maybe, this is a chance, an opportunity, an opportune time for God to meet with us right where we are, in the midst of our fears, in the midst of our sorrows, in the midst of our joys, in the midst of our hopes. And so today, may you come, and may you live in this Kairos moment that it may bless you and change you. Amen.